It's CJ!
That's me, CJ the Lego guy.
Hey everyone, CJ here. Hope that you're all doing well. With the Invincible War now said and done in the Invincible show, and the debut of Conquest coming next week, I thought we'd take a look at the aftermath and go over the fates of all the evil mark slash invincible variants, and compare differences between their comic and show counterparts. So with that, let's jump right in. We'll start off by looking at the pairings of evil marks that didn't make it to the end, and then we'll go over the surviving 8 variants and beyond. Starting off with Alternate Mark and Gogglesvincible, who share the same fate in both iterations as they faced off against Rexplode and the other heroes before blowing up alongside our dear sweet boy Rex, who went out epically in both versions. One difference being how destroyed their surroundings were, but that doesn't really matter compared to the incredible speech delivered by Rex just before he ignites his skeleton, taking out the evil mark. Bald Mark and Capvincible is next on our list, as the two had very different fates. Both still died by the end of the war. In the comics, Bald Mark went up against image hero Savage Dragon before the comic cuts to a different fight. But since Savage Dragon appears later, it is implied that he managed to escape Bald Mark by either killing him off, or the evil mark was killed off by Reanimin or another hero. In the show, however, Capvincible went up against Oliver, who was joined by other heroes to take on the evil mark. The weird thing being that next we see Oliver and the heroes, they actually kill off a different variant that we'll talk about later, which is very confusing to me, whether that be a continuity error or if I missed something. Please let me know down in the comments section if I did miss something. But back to Capvincible though, since he is not a part of the surviving 8, it's safe to say Oliver and the other heroes managed to kill him off screen, or he was ripped apart by Reanimin. Our next pairing is Mustache Mark slash Mustachible, still such a funny name, who also have completely different fates, as the comic version had him fight a female hero before dying in their fight. While in the show, he faces off against Tech Jacket in space, which is a crazy change since in the comics, the Tech Jacket fight happened differently, which we'll discuss later on. But back to Mustachible. Although he doesn't get turned to ash, he does indeed die alongside his comic counterpart. Next up is Maskmark and Hoodvincible, who share similar story beats with a few changes. They both start off fighting a hero team before Primark and Adam Eve join in the fray, until an actual leg-breaking injury causes Eve to be out of the fight, in which Mark takes her away to be healed. In the comics version, Maskmark is fighting the Cyberforce, and is the one to injure Eve before being beat by Mark, while Hoodvincible is taking on a different team I'm unfamiliar with by name, so please let me know down in the comment section down below who they are. I think one of them is Kid Thor, right? Could be wrong, but let me know. But yes, Hoodvincible is actually joined by another mark, this being Omni-Mark. That was a really cool addition, especially their 2v1 on Primark, and their difference in personality as well, which we'll talk more about in Omni-Mark's little segment. But nevertheless, both hoodlums are still confirmed dead, seeing as though they do not join the surviving 8 evil marks by the end of the war. The next pairing is actually a duo pack, and not our only one, seeing as though we'll be covering Bulletproof Mark slash Bulletproofable, also a funny name, who share the same fate in both iterations alongside another evil mark. The only difference being their means of death, as the comic version has BP Mark torn to shreds by Reanimin in the White Room, while PBable has his neck snapped in the Pentagon base, but still by Reanimin. Next up is the quote-unquote partner in crime to BP Mark and BPable in the form of Flaxan Mark slash Flaxancible. Why did it sound like some cough and cold remedy medicine thing? Who actually die before the former in both iterations. But both Flaxans die by having their heads bashed in by the Reanimin in the Pentagon base, which is what alerts Cecil in both iterations of what's going on during the Invincible War's start. The next pairing is Gogglesmark slash Sportvincible, who has an interesting set of differences in both versions. In the comics, Gogglemark joined in the fight with Hairmark against Tech Jacket, which turned the tide in the evil Mark's favor until Tech Jacket used all remaining power to disintegrate the two evil beings into dust. In the show, however, he's literally just hanging out dead. Like, bruh. He's just on the floor, pretty banged up though, implying some big fight did in fact happen off screen, meaning Sportvincible either died by a hero/hero team or by Cecil and his reanimant. If I made a mistake on where he was during the episode or who he was fighting with, please let me know down in the comments. Speaking of our last Evil Mark duo set, and to finish off the story from the previous pair, here we have Hairmark/Hairvincible, who shares a completely different fate in both versions too. In the comics, Hairmark is joined by Gogglesmark in his fight with Tech Jacket, which results in the two arrogant villains to be turned to ash. While in the show, here's when things get confusing, as if you remember how Maskmark was fighting Oliver and co. until the scene jumps back to them having defeated an evil Mark, but it turns out to be Hairvincible and not Hoodvincible. So the question is like, did Hairvincible join in the fight before and lost alongside Hoodvincible? Or was this a continuity error? Or like, what? Let me know in the comments what you think happened, or to confirm that I got something wrong here. Either way, both evil Marks with long locks died in the war. Our next pairing is Nogogglesmark and Nogogglesible, who pretty much have their story beats completely the same, except for an additional scene in the show, that being when Nogogglesible and Mr. Immortal are fighting in Egypt, which leads them to the running gag of the misogynistic mummy and the two female explorers. That scene was pretty funny, but not gonna lie, I got a little hyped when it looked like the mummy was gonna take over Nogogglesmark, but thankfully that didn't happen. So Immortal can catch a break for once, am I right? But, although that would have been super sick. But, back to No Goggles. Both fight the Guardians at the base, albeit the comic had the base destroyed a bit more, while the show extends the fight with both resulting in Darkwing making a sacrificial play by trapping the evil Marks in the Shadowverse, with Darkwing being implied dead alongside the evil Marks. For now. Next up is a duo whose identities are very confusing, as it's hard to pinpoint if these two are the accurate pairings, seeing as though the comics version of all the variants are hard to accurately pinpoint too, as I'll go over that later. But back to these two, whether or not my pairing is accurate or whatever, they both still die in the war. In the comics, this Nomaskible dies during the battle with Image comic hero Pit, who squishes his head and tears it up like a fruit. While Lightbluecible just dies off screen, I guess. That's just what happens. Same fate left to interpretation like Sportvincible. Who knows what happened with this one? Now here is when things get interesting, as we've reached the coolest change in my opinion when it comes to the Invincible War. And I think a lot of you would agree. The fate of Omni-Mark and Omnivincible are vastly different in both versions. Omni-Mark fights off against two Image comic heroes and dies by yo-yo, with his neck broken after glazing himself for nothing. The show, however, does something cool, with him starting off with the obvious. Omnivincible joins in the fight with Hoodvincible and survives the war. As we see him at the end having destroyed a major city, meaning he might have finished off the characters that he was last seen with, both the heroes and including Hoodvincible, and continued the destruction therefore after. This change was super cool, seeing as though he is one of the more unique looking evil Marks, plus his calm and reserved demeanor was a great addition, especially when he was paired with the brash Hoodvincible. And thusly, Omni-Mark joins the 8 surviving evil Marks. Plus, to add to that, I kind of liked how he was saying swearing doesn't make you cool. I'm like, I agree. Swearing and violence doesn't make a certain thing cool, as long as it's like well written, But I just thought that it was cool when he said it. That was my little blabber. On to the next thing. Thusly, we reach the interesting new additions as the show confirmed 18 variants while the comic had 16. Or so I thought. As when doing research for this video, I realized that the comic versions of the evil marks get muddy, as by the end there are additional marks not shown in the initial lineup page before the war began. Being a part of the surviving 8 evil marks, meaning, who's to say that the comics didn't have additional variants hidden alongside the initial group? When it comes to quad mark slash Nomaskible, I might have mistaken Lightbluecible as him. But oh well. It was hard to pick the non-mask marks accurately, especially when they have the classic suit on too. A shocking discovery I made with Stripemark is that he's actually in the comic version too, but not a part of the initial group. He's the one that shows up at the end with the surviving marks, which is hence the part I mentioned about things being confusing trying to pinpoint who's who, because there's also like a blue and black Vincible too that's not in the initial group, but whatever. We'll get to that when we get to that. But regardless, both of these evil marks survive to the end to destroy a major city and join in as 2 of the 8 surviving evil marks. Now we get to the fun part, talking about the remaining surviving 5 evil marks and comparing their iterations, both comic and show. Our first surviving duo is Phantom Mark slash Maskvincible, who share the same story beats as both fought Oliver and missed both their moms and their childhood homes that were destroyed by their dads. The only difference being how he disappears from his fight with Oliver and the color change of his goggles from light blue to light gray, which both changes were added to the show. Next surviving duo is Viltrumark and Viltrumicible, who both raised in New York also. Just noticed my grammar mistake. Yes, they did not raise New York as a child or an object. My bad. It's raised with a Z, not an S. Unless if even that's a mistake too. But yes, both Viltrumites beat a major Image comic hero in New York and lays waste to New York City before joining up with the remaining surviving marks to then be banished to an alternate dimension. A detail I forgot to mention with the prior duo. Even though he says the same line, "I've killed you before and I'll kill you again," or something like that. In the comics, Viltrummark fights Spawn, the second Spawn to be exact, which I didn't even know it was that kind of mantle. While in the show, Viltrumicible fights Wolfman, who also appeared in the comics, but due to copyright, he was allowed to take the place of Spawn during the fight. Next up, we have Prisonincible and Prisonincible, who both raised Moscow during the first day of the war. See, I spelled it right there. After the devastation, they joined the remaining evil mark survivors before being banished to an alternate dimension. The addition from the show is the fight with the Bug Knight looking hero, who I'm unfamiliar with, if he shows up in the comics or not. But we'll talk about him later. Now we have a fan favorite, or at least one of my favorite evil mark variants. Let's talk about Mohawk Mark and Movincihawk. Time to engage the hawk. Both of them fought Prime Mark among beating other heroes. Before having to leave him to the other heroes, though, Prime Mark bashed the sides of Evil Mark's head in both versions. Seeing as though he's amongst the surviving 8 Evil Marks, it's clear that they either killed or severely beat all of the heroes that were fighting them. The difference in the show is that when Mark fights him at the prison, Powerplex goes in the fray to attack him as well, which I thought meant, oh no, he's gonna be killed, isn't he? But thankfully, that wasn't the case. But what's confusing is that during the end of the show's Invincible War, Powerplex is standing overjoyed of having killed an evil mark. But it's very unclear which one it is, because the confusing part is that the last evil mark that he was with was Movincihawk. So does that mean that another evil mark joins in, letting Mohawk Mark leave? And while Mohawk Mark decimates the city, that's when that evil mark dies? Maybe it could have been Lightbluecible or one of the other Vincibles, maybe not so Vincibles. Who knows? The point is, Mohawk Mark is here to stay. Finally, we reach the deadliest of all the evil marks. We have Sinister Mark slash Capevincible. Bruh. I saw the memes about how the show had been hyping this mark just to call him Capevincible. I thought that was funny, not gonna lie. On that note, Capevincible did appear once before in the show, as he was last seen in one of the Angstrom Levy's visions of evil marks killing people. In that vision, specifically, Sinister Mark was killing his son right in front of his eyes. That was wicked. Even though both versions have him lay waste to all who oppose him, hero and city alike, and ends up being one of the 8 surviving evil marks that then gets banished to an alternate dimension, there are some differences in the show. In the comics, I believe, he comes across Oliver as well as some of the other evil marks too, while in the show he's seen being cocky while fighting Best Tiger in China. Best Tiger's fate we'll talk about soon. But yep, that's Sinister Mark for you, for now. Also, I forgot to mention an Omni-Mark segment, because I thought it was Sinister Mark, but oh boy, RIP not Boss Baby. We've now wrapped up with the fates of all the evil marks, but we're almost at the finish line, I swear. First, I want to go over the heroes seen from the trailers, because we all know there were a lot more heroes that showed up. Both those who survived and those who were unfortunately killed by evil marks. Also said before, as said before, RIP not Boss Baby. Also, we all know how incredibly emotional Rex's last stand was, especially his speech. But the last conversation between him and Ray. My heart. Yeah, the funeral is going to be devastating as the season finale for sure. But yes, back to these 5 heroes on screen. We know for sure Wolfman and Tech Jacket made it out, since we see Wolfman look out to the destroyed New York City, while Tech Jacket clearly kills Mustachible. A confirmed death is sadly Bug Knight from Stripevincible, as his face is clearly caved in. RIP Bug Boy. Best Tiger and the hero from Moscow are left to interpretation, but here's hoping that they made it out okay. Just injured, you know. But who's to say if whether or not Prisoner and Sinister Mark let them go? We'll never know until they show up next time. Alright, now let's talk about one last segment before we wrap up the video. The surviving 8 evil marks and the difference between comic and show. That being the swap of an unidentified black and blue evil mark variant that was unaccounted for in the beginning of the comics Invincible War, with the now surviving Omni-Mark. Then we have the additions of Quad Mark and Stripe Mark, who were in the comic version with the same situation as the other evil mark. And then we have the remaining 5 evil marks, who are 1-to-1 in both versions. That makes these 8 the surviving evil marks of the war that decide to turn on Angstrom Levy after he denies them what they want to do and banish them to an desolate and alternate dimension. For those of you who are show-only folks, get ready for major spoilers, as if you picked up on my hint from before. Spoilers, the stories of these remaining evil marks continue in the banished dimension, as we'll go into the next set of major spoilers before wrapping up the video. Oh boy. Major spoilers in 3, 2, 1. All but 2 evil marks are confirmed dead next we see this group, and oh boy, next time when Prime Mark goes through dimension hopping shenanigans and he finds himself in this dimension, he finds the horror that is a desperate Mohawk Mark trying to escape, as they are both confronted by Sinister Mark, who lives up to that name, as he resorted to cannibalism, eating the other evil marks at a desperation to survive in this desolate landscape. And oh boy, it is disturbing to think about how that story went. We'll have to wait and see how the show will handle this storyline in case that they decide to swap around the victims, add some additional lines, and change some things here and there, but more than likely, it'll keep the fates the same with Mohawk Mark and Prime Mark making it out of this dimension. leaving Sinister Mark to die alone, surrounded by the other versions of himself that he ate. Bum bum bum. If you thought spoilers ended there, guess what? There's more to Mohawk Mark than even that. But all that additional coverage will have to come at a later time, especially once the show catches up to that point in a later season. Whew, and with all that said and done, we finally come to a close with this video as we wrap up this Invincible War aftermath discussion. But with everything that I've said and done, please let me know down in the comment section down below all of your thoughts on Invincible War, both the show and the comic, any corrections that I've made mistakes on, or anything that I said differently, or just anything in general, and stuff to improve the channel too. Drop them all in the comments, for I'd love to give it all a read. But yep, that's it for the video, and if you liked, feel free to drop a like, consider subscribing to the channel if you're new, and checking out some of my other content here too. But with that, I'm CJ, insert Invincible card here. And I hope that you all continue to have a great day, and I'll catch you next time with whichever video I decide to do. But with that, bye-bye for now.